Hello friends, this is Lakshmi, and today let me talk to you about the poem titled Anthem for Doomed Youth, written by Wilfred Owen. Now, Wilfred Owen, as most of you know, belongs to the group of English poets called the war poets. And these are all young men who lived at the time of the First World War, and most of them were soldiers. Some of them died in battle or during the war. Wilfred Owen, who was born in 1873 and died in 1918, was a soldier too who fought for Britain, and he was killed in France just before the war ended. A tragic death it was. And I have done a video on the poem Strange Meeting, written by Wilfred Owen. And in that particular video, I have spoken in great detail about war poetry and its distinctive features. I will post the link for those of you who are interested. Now, Owen, like all other young men of his times, was initially very enthusiastic about the war because taking part in a war, it is an expression, because taking part in a war is an expression of one's patriotism. And therefore, he too thought very highly of war in the beginning. But when he went to France to fight the First World War, he witnessed the unnecessary death of countless soldiers, and this made him rethink about the idea of war. And he came to the conclusion that there is nothing glorious in war, there is just pity and futility. And the pity of war became the central theme of all the poems that he wrote. Now, this one, titled Anthem for Doomed Youth, is a short poem. It's written in the form of a sonnet, a Petrarchan sonnet, 14 lines. You know that a sonnet has 14 lines. And the rhyme scheme here is AB, AB, CD, CD, EF, FE. There's a difference there, EF, FE, and GG. So this sonnet, he titles it as Anthem for Doomed Youth. Anthem is a song, a short musical composition. And for the doomed youth. Why the doomed youth? For the youth who were unfortunate to take part in the war, for the youth who met with an untimely death. Now, when we read about the World War, we know that it was a huge war, one of the biggest wars the world had seen till then. And a lot of young men were killed in the battle. Men as young as, we couldn't even call them men, even boys who were 16 enlisted in the war and were killed. Most of them thought that war was something very, very heroic, but it was not so. And so it is all these young men that Wilfred terms as doomed youth. Youth doomed to die young, youth doomed to lose their opportunities to enjoy a happy life on earth. So let's read the sonnet, Anthem for Doomed Youth. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty horizons. No mockeries for them from prayers or bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbye. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall. Their flowers the tenderness of silent minds. Their flowers the tenderness of silent minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. Now let's go back to line 1. So he talks about the sad plight of these young men, the young Christian men who died but did not receive any funeral rites proper because they were killed in battlefields far away from home in France and Austria and elsewhere. And it was so sad because they had to be cremated without proper religious rites. And it is always considered a very unfortunate matter when a person who is dead is not given proper funeral rites, because we know that all cultures in the world hold a lot of importance to the rites that are to be performed after death, because in many cultures it is believed that the soul will not get an eternal rest if the burial is not done properly. So here we have so many young men dying. What passing bells for these who die as cattle. And so in the first line, Owen says that what passing bells? Passing bells are the bells that are tolled in during the funeral of a person to indicate the death of a person. And so he says, what passing bells for these who die as cattle. So these young men, they die like cattle. What is the significance of the comparison to cattle? Because they are slaughtered in masses. Not just one or two of them, but hundreds of them are killed every day. Maybe you've heard of this word cattle fodder. So they are killed, and especially in front, and maybe you have heard of this term cannon fodder in association with the First World War. It is referred to, fodder is food, like you say cattle fodder, food for the cattle. And same way during the World War, so many young men, when at the beginning of the war, the young men would run forward with their guns or whatever weapons available, and the cannons on the opposite sides and again the guns on the opposite sides would shoot them down, and they would die in large numbers. And they were just nothing but cannon fodder. It was not even a heroic death, if you look at it that way. Most of the young men did not even get a chance to fight, but the moment they stepped into the battlefield, they were shot down. There was nothing heroic about that. And that is why he calls them cattle, people who die in great numbers, slaughtered like cattle. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns. So the only sounds that these men hear when they are dying are the monstrous, frightening, angry sounds of the guns. Only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle. So you can see the stuttering rifles, because the rifles, when you hear them shoot, that they stop, and there is a stuttering kind of a noise that is made, and that is what he calls as a stuttering rifles' rapid rattle. So you can see in rifles' rapid rattle, he employs alliteration and the sound, the repetition of the sound R, it shows the violence and the anger of the guns and of the battle itself. So only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons prayers. So here there are no prayers for these young men. The only prayers that they receive, he's being very sarcastic here. He says that the only prayers that they receive are the sounds of the rifles. No mockeries for them from prayers or bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choir. So he says that there is no mockery of prayers or bells, in the sense that when I think of this line, I always think that the poet means to say that even performing funeral rites for these young men who have been pushed needlessly to death would be a mockery, because it is not fair to deny them a chance to live a beautiful life on earth. So then what is the point in the prayers or bells? That is how I interpret it. But it also means that in the battlefield, nothing else is possible, because the dead soldiers are anyway beyond all insult. And so even if they do not receive prayers or bells, it's all the same for them. So they do not get any prayers or bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs. And there are no accompanying choirs either to be played during their funeral service. And of course, he says there are choirs, but that is not the choir in the church. Instead, it is the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells. That is when the fighter planes, when they drop the bombs and shells, there is a wailing noise, like a mad cry, demented, mad. And the shrill, sharp sound of fighter planes and the shells that come down. And so it is the noise of these wailing shells. It is the wailing noise of these shells that perform the function of the choirs here. And bugles calling for them from sad shires. And here the bugles refer to the morning calls for the battle to begin. And so more and more soldiers, when old ones die, new ones are ushered in, and that alone comes for them. There is no choir, there is no music to accompany their funeral rites. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. So there are no candles. Usually when a funeral, when a dead body is taken forward in a procession or into the church, there would be people who walk before them and alongside alongside the bodies, with candles, lighted candles in their hands. But here in the battlefield, there are no candles, but you can see holy glimmers of goodbyes in the eyes of the boys. Here, boys, I guess, refers to the fellow soldiers, the ones who are alive. So the only candles that you can see here are the tears brimming. I feel the holy glimmers of goodbyes in their eyes is a reference to the tears that shimmer in the eyes of their fellow soldiers who stand by when the bodies are taken. So it is in the eyes of their friends that they see their goodbyes. There is no candle to take them forward. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall. Now, pall is the shroud, the cloth that is spread over the corpse. And so here, there are no palls, but instead the pallor of girls' brows, that is the young women, the girlfriends, the wives, who wait for them to return back home. It is the pale color of their brows that act as the pall for these young men, because the news of the death of these young men whose return is much awaited at home, it would bring in a lot of shock and sorrow, and the brows of their beloveds would turn pale. So the pall would be the paleness on the girl's brows. They are flowers and the tenderness of silent minds. So there are no flowers to be put over the bodies of these dead young men, but instead the tenderness of silent minds, that is the tenderness, the tender feelings for them, the love for them, which is felt by their dear ones, the silent minds, maybe their parents, their siblings, their friends, their relatives, their lovers back home who are far away from them. So it is the tenderness that these people feel for these dead soldiers that take the place of the flowers. So there are no candles, there are no palls, there are no flowers. They are all substituted by very sad pictures. Candles, there are none of them. Instead, we have the tears welling up in the eyes of their fellow soldiers. There are no palls. Instead, you have the paleness that you can see on the brow of their lovers. There are no flowers. Instead, you have only the tender feelings of love in silent minds of people who loved them and cared for them. And each slow dusk, a drawing down of blinds. And every evening, when there is a drawing down of blinds, this drawing down of blinds can also be a symbol of death, because each day we say, when it comes to an end, when evening comes, it is the death of the day. And here, drawing down of blinds symbolizes the end of something, the closing down of something. So each slow dusk draws the blind and marks the end of the life of so many young men. Tomorrow it is going to be another set of young men. And with the drawing down of blinds, these men are at least temporarily forgotten by their fellow soldiers, because they have to go on and fight the battle till an end is decided. So this poem is a very sad poem, where you can see that Wilfred Owen is being very, very honest about the experience of war. He makes no attempt to glorify war. Instead, he expresses the stark realities of men being killed, of untimely death, of sad goodbyes, and unhappiness on the whole. And this again is a poem, like all the other poems of Wilfred Owen, that speak about the theme of the pity of war, the futility of war. You have a poem titled Futility by the very same poet. There too, he talks about the futility of war, and he forces the reader to ask himself the question, why are battles fought? Why should we sacrifice the lives of so many young men? Why can't there be another alternative to bloody battles? So the same question is reiterated in this very poignant expression of the pity of war. Thank you.